ネリストの先生方、素晴らしいお話をありがとうございました。一つ質問と、あと一つ提案があります。で、質問はスージー・スナイダーさんに対する質問なんですが、このドントバンクプロジェクトというのはどういうふうにして日本の銀行の貸し出し先をですねお調べになったのかっていうのが質問です。それから提案の方なんですが、今度メキシコで核の非人道性に対する会議が開かれますが、その次をですねどうするかということなんですが、単独でメキシコの次にやりますよという国が出ていただければそれが一番ベストだとは思うんですが、もしそうならなかった場合に、日本も含めて12カ国が参加しています NPDI に働きかけて、少しずつお金を出し合っていただいて、例えば、ちょっと難しいかもしれませんけど日本でやるとかですねオーストラリアでやるとか、そういった形で費用を12カ国で分担するような形で、メキシコの次を検討いただけたらというふうに思います。以上です。
はい、それではその奥の方お願いいたします。はい、
2つあります。1つは、これは簡単な質問、知識に関する簡単な質問だと思うんですが、今1万7000発の核兵器っていうのがよく出てきます。でこの1万7000発の中に、水爆っていうのは含まれているんだろうかということで、もし含まれているとすれば、原爆と水爆の割合というのはどういう割合なんだろうと。核兵器っていうよりも水爆っていうのが表に出ると、多くの人が水爆の破壊力はこれはもう原爆の比ではないということを知っておりますので、インパクトが強いのではないかというのが一つです。でもう一つは、昨日若者たちの分科会に出て本当に新鮮な感銘を受けましたけれど、この第4分科会の中の一つのキーワードはやはり教育ということだったと思います。それはある意味当然と思いますけれど、若者と教育の共通しているのは未来を作るということなので、そういう意味でですね、1999年オランダのハーグで、平和アピール市民会議というのが開かれました。でそこで発表された、公正な世界秩序のための基本10原則というのが出ました。でその9番目のところにですね、全ての学校で平和教育は必修科目であるべきだというのが提言されていて、で私それ非常に印象に残ってるんですけれど、将来を作るのは教育だということから考えれば、この99年の、この提案というのが現在どういう状況にあるだろうかということが、知りたいと思います。以上です。
はい、そうしますと、質問を整理します。スージーさんの方に、銀行について、どういうふうに調べたかということがありました。それから1万7000発のうち原爆と水爆の割合ということはどなたかお答えになりますか。ティルマン聞きますか。で、それからあと平和教育の現状ということですが、お答えに、なる方いらっしゃいますか。それはデイビッドさんから。そうしましたら今の順番でスージーさん、ティルマンさん、デイビッドさんということでお願いいたします。
Thank you very much for a very good question. It's important to consider the methodology in research always. So I really appreciate that. That means there's good thinking. This is the report itself. All right, it's a very big, very heavy report. And to find out who invested, we used financial databases. Two specifically, Thompson 1 and Bloomberg. Because this information is recorded, it's available publicly. We also had to make a decision about which companies are we listed as nuclear weapon producing companies. In the report, we list 27 companies. Each of these make key components that are specific and designed for the delivery, the use and delivery of nuclear weapons. So only if they made key components did we include them in our report. Otherwise, the list would be very, very, very long because there are many companies involved in all sorts of the dual use side. But we kept some specific key components. And then we gathered the information through these financial databases. They're paid services, Thompson 1 and Bloomberg, and we worked with a research firm to make sure that we were highly accurate, and we checked and double-checked and triple-checked everything because we want to publish accurate information so that as campaigners, we can go to our banks and ask them to change their policies and stop banking on the bomb.
I might just follow up a little just to mention that the first edition of this report was produced in 2012, and we used the same research company. And not only have the facts been carefully checked with the institutions, but there have been no substantial criticisms, no errors identified in this report or the previous report. So I think we can rely on the data here. But remember, it's only the big ones. Only companies that hold more than 1/2 of 1% of a share or bond in total in nuclear weapons company is included. So there are many smaller companies that invest, so this is just a big one. I wanted to just make a comment about the types of nuclear weapons. I actually don't have that information about the type of how many atomic bombs versus how many hydrogen bombs. What has happened over the years has been that the destructive, as the weapons have become more efficient and being able to be targeted more accurately, the total explosive yield has diminished. So that most of the weapons that are called strategic weapons now, the ones that can fly between continents, are in the 100 to 500 kiloton range. That's still up to 30 times the size of the bombs that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The biggest bombs that are currently deployed are up to 5 megatons, and they're on Chinese land-based missiles. But it's very important that the destructive power, there is so much redundant destructive capacity that these reductions in the size of the weapons or in their numbers doesn't make any practical difference. And low-yield weapons in the tens or hundreds of kiloton range actually, in terms of killing people and producing smoke, they're about, if cities burn, they're about 100 times more efficient than big weapons. So if you spread the destruction around with smaller weapons, nuclear weapons are so powerful that it's actually more efficient in terms of killing and smoke to use smaller weapons spread more widely. So the effect is not directly related to the yield. So I think those things are important to bear in mind when we think about the types of weapons. But most modern weapons include both uranium and plutonium, and many of them are boosted as well. So there are various technical ways to make the weapon more efficient, whether it's a hydrogen bomb or not.
regard to the question about whether peace education is mandatory or should be mandatory or should be mandatory, I don't know the answer to whether the is part of the question. But I do have a feeling that peace education needs to be much more widely integrated into curriculum, and young people have to understand about the alternatives to violence as a means of solving conflicts. So peace education, I think, has many dimensions. It can start very early in the curriculum in very simple ways. It can be added in more profound and historical ways and political ways later in the curriculum. But my sense of the trends in education now are that it's very unusual for a curriculum to contain peace education, and there's much more emphasis on basic skills in reading, writing, arithmetic. But I think that's a great shortcoming of most educational systems. And I have an idea that in every college curriculum, there should be a course called Global Survival 101. And that course would be an introductory to basic survival issues in our time. So it would cover issues of nuclear weapons and how they affect the survival of the planet. It would cover ecological issues. It would cover pollution issues of the ocean, climate change issues of war and peace. I think it would be extremely valuable for every young person, well, not only in college, in high school as well, to have a sense of what are the great survival issues of our time. And being introduced to them, they would have an opportunity to decide how they might participate in finding solutions to those great problems.
I would just like to add one point on this question about peace education. The Japanese government has a very advanced peace and disarmament education program, which it likes to promote in the United Nations. And I think there's a lot of good information in that program, but I have talked to the officials associated with it, and they say they basically have no communication with the Ministry of Defense. So again, this is an example of this light side and dark side that I talked about. But I think that Hiroshima and Nagasaki have tremendous resources to offer to the world in terms of peace and disarmament education. I know that the Hiroshima Peace Culture Foundation has a curriculum on this subject, which they make available to universities. And I don't know about Nagasaki, but I'm sure Nagasaki has something similar.
ありがとうございます。平和教育で私も一言付け加えたいんですけど、私もいろいろなですね、国を回っておりますけれども、ピースボード活動でですね、しかし平和教育のことであれば、日本は進んでるんですよ、本当に。長崎、広島をはじめとしてですね、こんなに平和教育というものが行われている国はなかなかないんですね。ところがその日本ではそういったものがだんだんと弱くなってきてしまったりですね、ややその若い人たちの間ではややマンネリ化して受け止められてしまったりという非常にもったいないことでありまして、今あるものをもっと強くして、むしろ世界に輸出していくぐらいの考えを持っていただいたかなというふうに思います。それで先ほどの方がですね、メキシコの後ということを言っていたんですね。メキシコ会議の後に、日本やオーストラリアが会議をホストしてもいいんじゃないかな、そんなアイデアもありますけど、この点にどなたかお答え、コメントなさる方いらっしゃいますかね。ティルマンさんどうですか。
I don't know. I don't think anybody knows at this point. There are certainly some discussions underway, but it's not clear at this point. But we very much hope that the government will step up in Mexico to announce some kind of follow-up for the Mexico conference, but it's not clear yet what kind of follow-up or which government will take that lead. But there's plenty that we have to do to encourage government to do so and to work together to have a group that can really formulate a clear plan and strategy beyond Mexico. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。それでは他の質問、ご意見、じゃあ真ん中の方と他にいらっしゃいますか。じゃあ真ん中の方ですか。
テルマンさんにもちょっとお尋ねしたいんですけども、メキシコスロで開かれた非人道核兵器の非人道性についての会議、それからオスロ、日本もやっと今度署名したということなんですけども、実は国の安全保障という面から考えますとね、依然として日本も例えばスージーさんのいらっしゃるオランダもまだアメリカの核の傘の下での安全保障をしてるんじゃないでしょうか。非人道的というのは人間の非人道的を目的としているのであって、国としての安全保障は依然として核の傘の下にあるというこの矛盾をどのようにお考えでしょうか。
じゃあその後でティルマンさんに答えいただくとしまして、こちらにマイクをお願いいたします。
私の質問は、核兵器の非人道性を基礎にこれから何をなすべきかという全体会議の、テーマの中に含まれることなんですが、この非人道性を基軸に今非核兵器国を中心に核廃絶運動が動き始めて、その標的といいますか、核保有国に対してこれを迫っていくということが含まれていると思うんですけども、核保有国のこれに対するその捉え方といいますか、共同的な捉え方があるのかどうか、そこら辺がちょっと私には見えない部分があって、ティルマンさんとか実際にオスロとかメキシコでですね、そういう主催者側との関係も築いてきておられる ICAN あたりから、核保有国はどう捉えているかですね、このことですね、それが非常に大きな今後の課題であろうと思いますね。もちろん核保有国も究極的な核廃絶というのは、公言しているわけで、結局同じ非人道性の基軸の中で今後活動をしていくところに核保有国も取り込んだがいいと僕は思ってるんですけども、なかなかそうはしないだろうと思うんですね。そのせめぎ合いはどういうふうに今後進展するかということで、もしテルマンさんとか川崎さんですね、ジャックリーヌさんお考えがあれば教えていただきたい。
はい、ありがとうございます。そうしますと、今最初のご質問がですね、この人道性を語りながら核の傘に依存しているということ矛盾についてということでティルマンさんということでした。そして2つ目のご質問がこの核の非人道性ということに関する核保有国の反応対応ということをどう見るかというご質問で、これまたティルマンさんにあったんですが、2つ目のご質問に関しては他の方ももしかしたらお答えになりたいかも分かりませんが、まずティルマンさんに答えていただいて、他の方もあったら言ってください。
Thanks very much. Well, as Jackie outlined, the position of the United States and also the P5 position about Oslo was that they boycotted the Oslo conference, and they said that this was a distraction. They said that they welcomed the attention to the issue, but they felt that it was a distraction from the current efforts and from their work, which was demonstrating progress in nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. And they don't like this approach, and I think that's a good sign. But I think we can expect to find increasing opposition from nuclear-armed and nuclear-dependent states, especially if there is a sense that this humanitarian approach is headed in a direction which they don't want. For example, negotiations on some kind of prohibition treaty and I think an example of this is the Australian situation, the competing weaker resolution which was put forward by Australia at the last minute before the New Zealand statement was presented at the General Assembly, which was clearly an attempt to draw countries away from the stronger New Zealand statement and not allow the humanitarian discussion to be heading in a direction which they don't encourage. The Australian government, I have to say, has been deeply compromised by its dependence on nuclear weapons, has opposed the Red Cross resolution privately, despite publicly welcoming it, has actually been dishonest to the Australian Red Cross about its position, and has made it very clear that it wants to engage in the humanitarian discourse in order to divert and discourage countries from pursuing a nuclear ban, which it does not support. So I think we have to be alert to this unfortunate reality. But I think it's also a good sign that this discussion is causing some discomfort and challenging the nuclear weapons. I was very concerned yesterday to hear the representative from the Foreign Ministry back off, back away from the critical inclusion of under no circumstances in the New Zealand statement. Clearly, the Japanese and the Australian governments are not yet ready to give up that dependence, and we have to work much harder. But I think the political resistance is a good sign, because political change requires overcoming resistance, and there are powerful vested interests in this area. So I think it's a sign that we are on the right track. And I think that's very important that we continue this. There is, of course, this fundamental contradiction between accepting the inhumanity of any use of nuclear weapons and continuing to rely on them. And I think much of that relies upon this idea of deterrence, that somehow if we have them, we won't have to use them. And it somehow makes it seem benign and protective and abstract. The reality is, it doesn't matter how they're used, the effects will be the same, and any use must be prevented. There are not good nuclear weapons and bad nuclear weapons. There are not responsible governments who should have nuclear weapons and not responsible governments who must not have them. The problem is the weapon. And deterrence relies on a demonstrated willingness and capacity to use nuclear weapons and a willingness to use them. That's what it means. So it doesn't matter how you dress it up. Any use or willingness to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons is unacceptable, will cause unacceptable consequences. And I think we have to really expose this myth and magic that Ward talked about of deterrence. Thank you.
Thanks, Tilman. Also living in a nuclear-dependent country, this is a very difficult challenge that we have. And so I'll share with you some of the things that we have been doing to try to change the situation. First thing is we are working very closely with our members of parliament from every party, those in the government and those in opposition. In 2010, we had a unanimous parliamentary resolution that said we do not rely on U.S. nuclear weapons for our security, and instructed the government to tell the Americans that. We work closely with the Red Cross, and the Red Cross is very, very conservative in the Netherlands. It is mostly the leadership of the Red Cross is military, former defense leaders. But the Red Cross is now on record saying that the U.S. weapons in the Netherlands need to leave. Earlier today, Akira Kawasaki reminded us it takes us keep asking. We have to keep asking to get this change. It took us 3 years of meeting with the Red Cross almost every month to get them to make this statement. But it happened. It was quoted on the radio, in the newspaper, and it's a big deal, and it's making the change. And we had a follow-up resolution last year in our parliament as well that asks the United States not to modernize U.S. nuclear bombs that are stored in our country. And we sent a delegation of parliamentarians to the United States to say to the U.S. Congress, we don't want your bombs. Now that took a lot of work and money, but we hope that it will have some effect, and we know that the bomb modernization plan, at least latest I heard, is at least delayed. So we're having some effect. When it comes to the nuclear armed countries, they are not united anymore. There was a P5 joint boycott of the conference in Oslo. They could not get agreement as a P5, a permanent 5 nuclear armed countries, of the Security Council, could not get agreement to do a joint statement at the high-level meeting that Jackie spoke about before. That lack of unity gives us space. The last thing is the use of weapons of mass destruction this summer, the use of chemical weapons in August, brings the attention back to the fact that these are weapons that even if your country has not banned them, Syria never signed the Chemical Weapons Convention. Syria never agreed to eliminate its weapons. Syria resulted in immediate global condemnation. Any use of these weapons is catastrophic of all weapons, but outlawing nuclear weapons is, really our next big thing. And I think it's something that we can and will do if we keep working at it, keep being clear, and keep recognizing that there are small positive steps. And I think that was all I want to say. Thank you.
ぐらい質問を取っていきたいと思いますが、結構じゃあお二人でいきましょう。こちらとそれから真ん中の方先に。
私今度世界州のピースボートに川崎さんと一緒に乗って帰ってきました。20カ国約2000人を対象に証言をしてきましたけれども、質問はクリーガーさんに被爆者のやはり証言というものが大事だと言われました。今度私被爆の中で船の中で聞いたのはトルーマン大統領のお孫さんも一緒でした。そしてアメリカの被爆者について伺いました。103回原爆の実験に立ち会って、その子供さんは奇兵児が生まれたということを彼は証言しました。アメリカ国内での証言活動はどういうふうになっていますかというのはクリーガーさんに対する質問です。それから非人道性については、私どものやはり新しい倫理観というものをご提案されました。日本人に対する新しい人道倫理観というものを我々なりに一応考えていますが、やはりこの60年間の我々の育った倫理観はなかなか変わらない。ドイツは福島の原発後3ヶ月に辞めた倫理委員会は17人の委員会に産業界、技術者を入れないで宗教とか倫理だとか命という問題の委員会を作ってメルケル首相に提案されて即原発を止められた。それからアウシュビッツを見なければ見るというのが教育プログラムに EU の中ではもう定まった。したがってアウシュビッツを見るお客が若い人が相当増えてきたというのが私の聞いた中谷さんという日本の通訳でございました。案内。そういう面からお二人に今の件についてお伺いをした。以上です。
すみません、宮田さん、2つ目のご質問のポイントは、もう一回ちょっとおっしゃってください。
2つ目のポイントは、その新しい倫理観、新しい倫理観を日本人に何を期待されるかということです。私どもは日本人特有の自然環境だとか優しい気持ちだとかそういうものがあるわけなんですね。そういうものをなかなか被爆者の証言の中に入れられない、あるいは入れた証言というのはなかなかできない。そういう面では新しい倫理観というものを我々はどういうふうに自分たちで作り上げたらいいか、これは一つの悩みでございますから、何かアドバイスがありましたら内川さんあたりに伺います。はい、ということです。
ありがとうございます。そしたら真ん中の方お願いいたします。
こんにちは。今日は有意義なお話をどうもありがとうございました。福岡で高校生1万人署名活動を行っているものですが、私は昨年ベルギーに1年間留学しておりまして、現地で被爆者の思いを伝える原爆の悲劇を伝える原爆写真展というものを企画して開きまして、ベルギーの人々から核兵器廃絶への賛同を得ることができました。で、先ほどのお話の中にユースと被爆者の連携、それから若者の力、そういうものがありましたが、私のような日本の若者が他にできる活動、他に核兵器廃絶のためにできる市民レベルの活動があれば具体的に教えていただきたいなと思います。よろしくお願いいたします。
ありがとうございます。そうしましたらですね、デイビッドさんにご質問がありましたので、デイビッドさんにお答えいただきながら、その若者が具体的にできることのという最後のご質問ですとか、あるいはこの、新しい倫理観というようなことについてのアドバイスということは非常に大きな質問でありますけれども、お答えできる方がいらっしゃったらですね、お願いしたいと思います。まずデイビッドさんからお願いします。
Well, first of all, regarding Hibakusha testimony in the United States, I think when Hibakusha have an opportunity to speak to schools or organizations or other groups in the United States, they are extremely effective but I would say they don't get enough opportunities to speak to groups. There are hibakusha that live in the part of the United States where I live, California, and I know that they want to speak more. I know that they're enthusiastic to share their message about this should never happen again, and to tell their stories. And I've witnessed, of course, on many occasions, their effectiveness, but they don't get into enough places. And I think that's a job for civil society organizations to try and help hibakusha to get into more places, to tell their message. It's not so easy in the United States to challenge the mythologies about U.S. goodness. So, you know, I talked about some of the belief systems that exist in the United States that need to be shattered, but it's very hard to shatter belief systems when they're deeply held. And and one of the greatest myths of all, I think, is the myth of the goodness of the United States that's shared among people in the United States, that allows them to cheer USA, 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 and to maintain nuclear arsenals despite the obvious moral shortcomings, and even to justify somehow in the minds of many American people that somehow the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were justified. So it's, as I say, it's quite difficult to penetrate those belief systems, but I believe the hibakusha have been quite effective in doing it where and when they can. And I have one comment on the high school student activities. We have we have a campaign that we're trying to spread out in the United States called Nukes Are Nuts. Now that's difficult to translate, but it's a very simple statement which actually means nuclear weapons are crazy, certifiably crazy, and it's colloquial. But we want young people and older people everywhere to take a smartphone and say in just a few seconds, very short, one sentence or two sentences, why they don't like nuclear weapons, and then conclude it by saying nukes are nuts. I think this is a hard concept to get across, but the basic idea is that young people should have a very simple message. Nuclear weapons are bad because they threaten everything we love. Nuclear weapons are bad because they can destroy everything we treasure. Nuclear weapons are crazy because they use so much money that could be going to other things. And so just if young people would make those very simple statements and take a picture of another young person making the statement and then put it on the use social media like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube to spread your messages, and you can have fun with that, and it can be done in any language, and you can share your ideas across borders and make friends with other people in the world that also think nuclear weapons are terrible and crazy instruments of death. But it's one way to share your message and to get messages from other people around the world. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, thanks. Wow, good questions. I'm going to stick with the last question of things that you can do as a young person. Because I started doing no nukes things as a young person too, and I think it's important. And you need to find stuff. There's social media. There's also little things you can do, like get together with your friends and have pizza and talk about nuclear weapons. Tell them what you learned at this conference. That's simple. Maybe write a letter together. Maybe write a letter to the newspaper together about this issue. Last Monday was the 30th anniversary of the biggest demonstration ever in the Netherlands on nuclear weapons. And so a group of young people wrote a letter to the newspaper, an opinion piece, that said, we weren't even born when this demonstration took place. But we are now responsible for making sure that the wishes of our parents and grandparents who took part in that demonstration get carried out. And they called on those in power, the politicians, the government, to act, to remember that this has been a long-term desire of people, and they, the young people, should not be left with this type of legacy, with this burden. It was great. It got a lot of responses too from people who said, hey, we were at that demonstration, we did our best, now it's your job to carry on. But it's all of our jobs to carry on, and specifically the job of those with political power to put the political will to get rid of nuclear weapons. And so I'd like to also say that if you look at the ICAN website, and lots of websites, there's lots of things that are out there for you to do. And so the ideas are there, it's just a matter of finding time and energy and getting together with your friends to make a difference, because we can.
ありがとうございます。はい、だんだんと時間になってまいりましたので、この辺りでまとめに入っていきたいんですけども、一つだけ若い人たちが何ができるかということもありまして、いろんな答えがあったんですけれどもね、一言じゃ言いにくいんですが、世界中に若くてこういった問題を一生懸命面白い形でやってる人がいっぱいいるんですよ。それで私はですね、この ICAN の活動をするようになってからとりわけですね、ヨーロッパ、ジュネーブですとか、あるいはこの前オスロで会議があった時もそうですけども、本当にオスロの市民会議なんていうのは若いボランティア、変な言い方すれば原爆のことなんてあんまり知らないようなですね、若いボランティアの人たちがたくさん集まって何かやろうぜってことで大きな500人の会を実現をしましたし、その運営の仕方とか、会の演出の仕方もそうですけれども、本当に素晴らしかったんです。これ口で言うのが難しいんですけれども、それからジュネーブのオフィスでもですね、さまざまな動画を作ったり、Facebook でそういったものを共有したりというのも本当に面白いものがたくさん出てるんですよね。ですので私は思いますのは、高校生平和大使のグループが毎年ジュネーブに行って、その大使の皆さんにね、政府の皆さんに会うのももちろん続けていただきたいんですけども、そういう機会があればですね、各国でいろいろ若いグループでやってる人たちがいますから、そういう人たちと出会ってもらって、こんな面白いことやってる人がいるんだということの、そういう友達付き合いを始めてもらって、そこからアイディアをもらうのがですね、いいんじゃないかなというふうに思います。で、私からはそこだけ申し上げて、あと最後ですね、コーディネーターのジャッキーさんにですね、カバッソさんにまとめの言葉をいただきたいというふうに思います。
Thank you. I want to thank again the panelists, and I want to thank all of the participants for your very thoughtful questions. At the beginning of his remarks, David Krieger said that governments are not going to do the right thing, and it's up to us to make them do the right thing. I think that may be the foundational point of our discussion here today. I want to reiterate the success story that I told you about the advancement of the positions begun by Abolition 2000 in 1995 and now manifest in the non-aligned movement resolution, and encourage everybody to support that resolution. In Japan, I think it's unlikely the Japanese government will vote for it, but they should hear from you about it because it says what we want. I want to just give a few additional kind of action-oriented or forward-looking points that weren't raised earlier. We are sitting here hosted by Mayor Taue, and Mayor Taue is a international leader in Mayors for Peace and a tremendous international resource. Mayors for Peace is very powerful in Japan, and we also have here, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Komizo, who is the new Secretary General of Mayors for Peace, and he has a particular interest in getting to know and work with grassroots groups of all kinds. So please, if your mayor is not a member, please enroll your mayor, but work with Mayors for Peace. Mayors for Peace is a really powerful force for nuclear weapons abolition. We've talked at this conference a lot about Fukushima and nuclear power. Akira has brought up the problem with Rokasho, and a point that I have not heard made is that nuclear technology, nuclear power technology, is viewed by many countries as a kind of a currency of technological sophistication, as a desirable technology. We have seen how undesirable the technology is at Fukushima, and something that ordinary citizens can do is to delegitimize nuclear technology as a positive thing to be sought. And this general delegitimization of nuclear technology can help to contribute to delegitimizing nuclear weapons. We had a session which touched upon how to move towards creation of a nuclear weapon-free zone in Northeast Asia. There is another area in the world where a nuclear weapon-free zone is very much on people's minds, and that's in the Middle East. And so I want to let you know that although the governments have failed to meet the deadline set in the 2010 NPT Review Conference document to hold a conference to begin the process of negotiating a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East, a very brave group of Israeli anti-nuclear activists is calling for an international conference in Haifa this December 6th and 7th. The conveners of this meeting include former members of the Knesset, that's the parliament, including the former Speaker of the House, and it's very important that we express our international solidarity. I hope that some Japanese people will be able to go, and those who can't go, I think it would be wonderful to send messages of solidarity. I'm hoping that our Mayors for Peace members in Israel, in both the Palestinian parts of Israel and the Israeli parts of Israel, will be able to participate. Finally, I want to bring to your attention a very significant historical fact that many people have forgotten. December 8th is the 50th anniversary of the decision in the Shimoda case, a case brought by Hibakusha against the Japanese government seeking compensation. The case took 8 years to litigate in the Tokyo District Court, and the decision was rendered in 1963. Since we are talking about humanitarian consequences and outlawing nuclear weapons, the world needs to be reminded of what the court found. This is what they said in their decision, quote, "The attacks upon Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused such severe and indiscriminate suffering that they did violate the most basic legal principles governing the conduct of war." They also said, quote, "The aerial bombardment with atomic bombs of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was an illegal act of hostilities according to the rules of international law." So this is a decision that is very important to remind Japanese citizens and world citizens about. The Japanese Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms will be holding a conference on this subject in December. Some members of that organization are here participating. I urge you all to pay attention to the outcome. So, final words. I was very involved in efforts in the United States to prevent the United States government from launching a potentially truly catastrophic military attack on Syria after the gas attack in August. And my organization was advocating that the international community should rise to the challenge of utilizing the international legal architecture that it has put in place over the last 70 years, including the United Nations itself and the Chemical Weapons Convention and other agencies. And no one was more surprised than I was when that's what happened. And I think the reason it happened is because the world went right up to the abyss of what could have turned into World War III and took a step back. And maybe the lesson of that is that it's not enough to abolish nuclear weapons. Maybe we need to abolish war because war is no longer an option. And I was reminded recently that Senji Yamaguchi, the very prominent hibakusha from Nagasaki who died earlier this year, went to the United Nations in 1982 and delivered the message of the hibakusha. No more Hiroshimas, no more Nagasakis, no more hibakusha, no more war. Thank you.
ありがとうございます。それではこれで全体会議を終了したいと思います。皆さん本当どうもありがとうございました。